Hello, welcome to another exciting Unity tutorial with me, Romy Fauzi. In this video, we are going to try to create an intermediary input class for making the new input system to be able to work with the Bolt visual scripting. So this is basically what we are going to create, and the script is actually driven by the new input system. And here, as you can see, we have the control mapping that I've just created, and this flow basically will get value from the input of the left analog, the jump, and the fire actions binding here. So if I press play, I'm going to show you how this works here. And we have on button hold, on button down, and the on button up state here. So for jumping, if I hold spacebar, you see that the Boolean value stay true. And here for the on button up, if I hold the control, it will stay false. But if I release this, it will stay true for 1 frame. And I can also change the vector value by pressing the W or S, A, and D. Or we can use the left stick analog on a gamepad. So let's start working on it. So now first, we are going to import the new input system package. So let's just go to the window menu. Under the package manager, I'm going to search for the input system. So let's just type input, and it will filter out the package. And here, you see that we have this input system. Let's just install this. And it may take a while to install this. And then Unity will ask to restart the editor once it's installed. And when the warning window opens, just press yes. This will restart the editor. Okay, so now the Unity has restarted. I'm going to select the input system package again. And I'm going to import the on-screen controls. And we are going to use this to create a touch screen controller. Now it's imported. Let's just close this. So first thing, we need to create an input action asset. So I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm going to call this new input. And inside this folder, we can create a new assets. Go to the create menu, and here we will find an input actions asset. So this is basically an asset object, a file, and let's just call this basic control. And now once the assets have been created, we can open by double clicking or click on the edit asset button here. And now we need to create a new action maps. Action maps is a set of actions that we can map to a certain key bindings, and we can switch between action maps actually on runtime or on the editor. So let's just create a new action maps. I'm going to call this basic. And for the actions, the first action that I want to create is a vector2 action. So we can just select the action here. And here, under the properties action, we can just change the action type to pass-through. And then for the control type, I'm going to change this to vector2. Okay, let's just rename this action. So let's just choose rename here, and I'm going to call this left analog. And now let's open this. And for the binding, I'm going to change the first binding to be mapped to the gamepad left stick. So let's just pick this left stick gamepad. And we want to create another binding, and this one we want to add a 2D vector composite. This one is a normal binding, this menu here, but we can add another type of binding, which is the 2D vector composite. So we want to do that. And here, let's just call this keyboard map. And for the up binding, I'm going to bind this to a W keyboard. And for the down, I'm going to map this to S. And for the left, let's map this to A, and for the right, I'm going to map this to D. Okay, we can create another binding for the up, down, or left arrow, but I'm not going to do that. You can try it on your own. And here, under the action, I'm going to create a new action, and I'm going to call this jump. And for the first binding, I'm going to map this to the gamepad, but this time I'm going to map this to the button south. Usually, it's the X on the PlayStation or A on the Xbox layout gamepad. And then I'm going to also add another binding, and this time I'm going to pick the spacebar. So I'm going to listen for the keyboard and then press space and then pick space keyboard here. And the other thing that we want to create is the button for firing. So I'm going to rename this to fire, and the first binding will be the gamepad. So let's just pick the button is, and this is usually presented by a square icon on the PlayStation style gamepad or X on the Xbox style gamepad. So let's just pick this one here. And for the fire, let's add another binding. And this time I'm going to listen for the control, left control on the keyboard. Okay, so now we have this map here. Let's just save the asset. And if we go to our project view here under the package, we want to go to the input system folder. Under the input system folder, we have another input system. Let's just open this, and inside this folder, we want to go to the plugins folder. Under the plugins folder, we want to go to the player input. And here we have another input actions asset, and this is the default input actions from Unity. Let's just pick this, open it by double clicking it, and I want to copy the UI. We need this action map because it has a lot of actions related for navigating the UI for the new event system. So we want to copy this instead of creating a new one from scratch. Let's just right click and then copy the UI action maps here. And for pasting it, we can just select the basic here and then press paste. And this will create a new action map exactly like the one from this default input settings. So now we want to close this and then save the asset. Now we have finished setting up the basic control input actions. We want to close this, and let's just go back to the new input folder here. And when we select this basic control, we can generate a C# class. So we want to check this box and then press apply. And this will automatically create a new C# script. Okay, now the C# has been generated. I'm going to clear the console, and then I'm going to open this C# script. And now basically we have this class basic control, and this has all of the button settings that we've just generated or set up on the edit assets user interface. We don't need to change anything in here. And now to make the new input system work with the bold assets, we need to create a new C# script. So I'm going to create a new C# script, and I'm going to call this InputInterface. Okay, now let's open this C# script. And here I'm going to create a new variable type of basic control, which is the C# assets that has been generated by the input actions. And let's just call this control. And then we want to create a awake method, as well the onEnable method and the onDisable method. Here inside the awake, we want to initialize the control class. So let's just create a new instance by typing the keyword new basic control. And on enable, we want to enable. So let's just run the enable method, and this will enable our basic control class. And for onDisable, we want to run the disable method. Okay, so now we finish initializing our new control input actions. The next thing that we want to create is a public, and this will be a type of vector2, and let's just call this left analog. And then we want to create 3 additional variable type of dictionary with a key of string and a value of boolean. So the first one will be a type of dictionary with a pair value of string and boolean, and let's just call this on button hold. And let's initialize this, and we can just copy this line here and then paste this 2 times and then change the variable name. So this one would be the on button down, and this one would be for the on button up. And basically we want to loop through all of our buttons inside the control and save those button information to this dictionary here with its name as the key and its status, whether it's pressed or not, on this boolean value pair here. So now inside the start method, we want to loop using the for each, and we want to loop through the control basic, and this is the action map name that we've declared on the input actions, and we want to run the get method and then get the actions. And basically this will return input action from the input action map. So now we've declared the for each loop, we can just add each of the button to each of the dictionary here. So let's just add first to the on button hold, and we want to add the item.name, and for the value we want to set the default value to false. And I'm going to copy this line here, paste this 2 times and change the variable, and this will be the on button down, and this should be for the on button hold. Okay, and for the new input system here, we need to map an event or we need to subscribe a method to an event for each of the button here. So here the item would be the input action because we are looping through all of the input action collection. So we can just access the item, and there are 3 events. The first is perform, second one would be the cancel, and the third one would be the start. But we are going to use the perform and the cancel. So for the on button hold, we want to set the perform to be subscribed to a new delegate. And inside this delegate, we want to map the on button hold down value state depending on the event that has been fired. So for example here, we want to access the on button hold, and then we want to pass the item.name. And when we perform the press, we want to set this to true. And we can just copy this line here, paste it here. And for the next event that we want to run is the canceled event here. And whenever we cancel the button press, or when we release the button, we want to set the on button hold value for the related button name to false here. And the next event that we want to subscribe is the item cancel to the on button up. I forgot to rename this one, so I'm going to rename this to on button up. And now let's just copy the item.cancel line here and then paste it here. And for the dictionary that we want to subscribe is the on button up dictionary. And for the value here, we want to set this to true. So for on button up, we want to trigger the true value whenever we release the button. Now let's save this. And here inside the update, we want to loop through the control basic get actions again. So let's just create a new for each loop. And I'm going to copy this keyword here, paste it here. And now we want to loop through the button for the on button down. And for the on button down is quite simple actually. We need to only access the dictionary and then pass the item name and set this value to the item.triggered. And this will register true only on the first frame when we start pressing the button. So on the frame after, the value will be false again by default. So this behaves exactly like an on button down event. And then for canceling the on button up value, we need to create a late update method. And here we want to loop through all of the control basic get actions again. And here basically we want to grab the on button up dictionary and loop through the item name inside the dictionary and then set the value back to false. Okay, so now we have the script here. Let's just go back to Unity and let's set up the scene here. So now we need to update the unit setup for the bolt system. So let's just go to the tools under the bolt, under unit option wizard. We want to scroll down and go next to the types page. And here let's create a new type and we want to search for the input interface. And there you go. We have input interface in global, and let's just select this and then press generate. This will generate the code base. So now when we update the type options, we can access or we can expose the input interface in the flow graph. So we can use this data to trigger Boolean and vector2 options. By the way, here on the script, if we have the right analog, then we need to create a new variable for the left analog type of vector2, and we also need to set up a new pass-through vector2 type actions on the action map inside our input actions asset. I forgot one thing here. On the update, we need to map this to the left analog control. So let's just do that quickly here. I'm going to set the value of our left analog vector2 value to the control basic, and here we can access the left analog action, but this return an input action, so we need to use the read value method, and we need to pass a signature of vector2 and then close this with a set of parentheses, just like get component method, and this asks for a generic type, so it can be anything. So let's save this again, and now it's compiling I think the unit has been already updated. So now let's just create a new flow, and I'm going to call this new input. And let's create a new empty game object here. This will be the input interface, and we need to put this into an object. So let's just add the input interface script, and let's just create the bolt object. So this would be the bolt flow, and I'm going to add a flow machine and then drag the new input flow to the macro slot here. So let's just press edit graph here. Okay, now the graph is open. So I'm going to right click and then go to the event. Under the lifecycle, I'm going to add an update method. And here I'm going to add a object variable. So the variable will only available on the object scope here, not on the graph scope or on the scene scope. Let's just call this input object for the variables. And I'm going to set the type to input interface. There you go. And I'm going to drag this game object here as the value, and it will pick the script and save the scene. Just to be on the safe side, I'm going to call this new input scene. Okay, now let's test this. In order to test this, we can drag the variable here, and then we can add an expose input interface. So if I type input interface, you see that we have this expose input interface. And now once I click this, you see that we have this a very big unit, and it shows all of the variable that we've defined or declared on the script, which is the left analog type of vector and the on button hold, on button down, and on button up dictionaries here. So now we need to connect the get variable to the slot here, the object slot. And now to test this, we can just add a Boolean. I'm going to use the bool parse. Okay, yeah, we can use this. And let's just connect this. And let's add another action or unit. And this will be a type of vector normalize. Let's just search for vector normalize. I'm going to use the vector to normalize just to see the value of the left analog and the dictionary here. Let's connect this and then connect this to here. And now we can just drag the left analog to this slot here. And for the on button hold, we can drag to here and we can get the dictionary item. So we need to use this value here. And for the key, we can connect this to a string literal. And we know the button name, which is jump and fire. So let's just use the jump here. And then let's just duplicate the dictionary get item here. And I'm going to connect the on button down. And for the key, we want to also pick a string literal. So we can pass the button name, which is fire. And for testing this out, we can only test this one button for our flow graph here. But later you can just use this Boolean value to trigger whatever actions you want to, for example, for jumping or for firing an object. So after second thought, it will be better to use a compare bool. So I'm going to delete the bool parse and then add the bool unit. And I'm going to pick the Boolean. And here I'm going to use the compare to value. And this way we can feed two different Boolean here. So we can just pass the jump on hold or jump hold and the fire on button down here to the second value here. We don't need the output. We can just inspect the status of the button press on the wire here. So now let's press play and test this out. And now as you can see here, our vector value, the left analog value is 0, 0, and both of the button is false. So if I press W, you'll see that the Y value turns to 1. If I press S, it turns to -1. And if I press A, it turns to -1 on the X value. And if I press D, it turns to 1 on the X vector. So this behaves exactly like an input get axis. And basically we can use the X and Y value to drive our character movement. And for the jump button here, you see that if I press space and hold this, the value will stay true. And if I release this, it will turns to false, as you can see here. And for the fire value, I'm going to press Ctrl and take a notice on the false value here. It will blink for 1 frame and then back to false. So it fire the true value for 1 frame only. And as you can see, there you go. And if we set this to on button up, so I'm going to change the connection here. So let's just connect the on button up to the dictionary slot here. And you'll see that if I press Ctrl, now I'm pressing the Ctrl, but the value stay false. But when I release this, it turns true for 1 frame. There you go. So now we have a fully working system for Bolt to work with the new input system. And since there are no official way of doing it, I find this to be quite reliable. So if you want to access each of the button with a certain or a different press style, you can pick one from the 3 dictionary that has been provided by the InputInterface script here. And I'll put the complete script in the description so you can download it right away. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thanks a lot for watching. If you like this video, hit that like button and do subscribe. See you on the next video.